Hello my dear friends, you're in the Military Summary channel, and this short video we're going to discuss the most important events that took place during the previous night of the local time. Today we have lots of very interesting updates, so let's start. And first we're going to talk about Kiev. According to the information we have, a wiretap was found today in the office of the Commander-in-Chief of the Armed Forces of Ukraine, Valery Zaluzhny. And given that, the source mentioned that internal power struggles as the background for it, it does not appear it was Russia who did it. So basically, the source was saying that was made by the Zelensky and his office, or somebody who connected with Zelensky. Furthermore, other sources added that listening devices were found not only on the commander-in-chief of the Ukrainian troops Valery Zaluzhny, but also on his employees. So there is a group of Ukrainians who control the entire general staff of Ukrainian forces. Very interesting situation. Obviously, this piece of news appeared today not without a reason. Obviously, Zaluzhny probably wants to do something against Zelensky and his office. So we'll see what is going to be next. Now we're moving to the situation on the ground, where we have also lots of very interesting updates. And first we're going to talk about Robotina. The Russians continue their pressure from the south, from Novoprokopovka, in direction of Robotina from the south. We got today one geolocated video how the Ukrainian tank was running away from the combat line, and as a result of probably anti-tank missile, or as a result of getting on the minefield, that tank was destroyed. So basically, the Russians continue pressure from the south, and according to all these geolocations that we got yesterday about significant Russian concentration of FPV drones on the same area, probably the Russians will soon start the ground operation with the purpose to restore control over the fortifications and the trenches on the south of the village, so in this area. Now we are moving further to the Donetsk area, where we got also significant number of very interesting updates, and the most important ones are coming from Pervomaiske, from this area. There are very heavy clashes in this area. The Russians haven't managed to achieve some good results or nice results in the vicinity of Stepovo, Berdichi. The Russians managed to break through the Ukrainian defense belt in the vicinity of industrial area, but now they're regrouping. They need a few days maybe before renewing of the next waves of attacks. The Russians couldn't establish control over Severna and Toninka, but there is another city the Russians are fighting for, and we're talking about Pervomaiske. The Ukrainians published the footage and scenes of FPV drone strikes and bombardments against Russian armored vehicles, tanks, infantry in this area, which confirms that there are very heavy clashes in this area, where the Russians are trying to penetrate the Ukrainian defense belt. And what is the main Russian plan and the Russian purposes on this direction? For example, Deep State map and Syriac map have already updated their maps, showing significant Russian progress. According to them, the Russians, as a result of offensive operation, managed to establish control over this territory. And this is a significant result from the Russian side. Now let's discuss what are the main purposes of the Russians and why the Russians managed to achieve results in this area. First of all, we need to add some markers on the map. There is a water barrier that goes, let's say, from Pervomaiske, this one, in direction of Severna and Toninka, this one. The Russians, according to geolocations and according to the Russian progress, are moving along Naberezhnaya Street from Vodiane in direction of Nitailova. So this is the Russian progress and advances. There is another river, another water reservoirs that lays on the south of Russian progress, of the area of Russian progress, and this is the second water barrier in this territory. So the Russians are moving from Vodiane step by step. They started this movement in October, and currently, as you can see, they have almost reached the western water barrier. If the Ukrainians want to attack, they have just one solution for this. The Ukrainians can counterattack the Russians from the western side, let's say from Yasnobrodovka. They can send some reinforcements, some reserves, some tanks, some armored vehicles. They need to cross the first water barrier somewhere in this area, and from this direction the Ukrainians can counterattack. But this is very difficult operation, because the Russians do have complete fire control over the main supply road and the main pontoon bridge in this area, or the bridge, or anything that left from the bridge in this territory. So that's why everything can be counted, and every single tank that entered this territory is numbered by the Russian forces. So it's not a big deal to destroy armored vehicles, tanks with FPV drones or with artillery fire and so on. The second way how the Ukrainians can counterattack the Russians is northern direction, so this one. Yes, the Ukrainians can counterattack, but because of the fact that there is a water barrier to the north of this line, the Ukrainians can use, let's say, forces from Tonenka and Severne. They need to move their forces something like this, and only after that they can counterattack the Russians. So basically the distance is too long, and the Ukrainians need a lot of time to bring armored vehicles here, and of course everything is under Russian fire control, and everything can be destroyed that gets these small salient or something like this. So the Russians, we can say, feel themselves pretty comfortable and safe in Pervomaiske, and they do have possibilities to move further. The Ukrainians can counterattack the Russians also from the south, but there is not so many roads that Ukrainian can use, and the distance and the, let's say, it's not much square in this area, and the Russians also have full fire control over the bridges and over the roads in this area. So there are no problems for the Russians to continue advancing. Also from the other side, we can understand that the main Russian purpose and the main Russian goal is to get the western water barrier like this one and to establish complete control over this territory. This will allow the Russians to split this territory in two parts. This is the first goal of the Russian forces, and the second one, the Russian by this progress will be able to establish complete fire control over the M30 road that goes from Nitailova to Pervomaiske, basically to establish maybe even operational encirclement, or to create complete fire control artillery pocket of above the village of Pervomaiske, starting from this territory till the village by the name of Peski. So this area will be collapsed automatically, and the Russians gonna have no problems to start at some point their movements from Peski in the same direction, and they will capture everything they want. So this is the battle for this territory. Now the important goal that the Russians can achieve by taking Pervomaiske and getting this line is establishing control over the road that goes from Yasnobrodovka to Nitailova, so over this territory. And this is probably the most important goal that the Russians are planning to get. Why is that? First of all, this is one of the three roads that Ukrainians use to supply and support their forces in Avdiivka. So once again, Avdiivka has few different supply roads. Most of them are going from Orlovka, and after Orlovka, the Ukrainians use the area Umanskaya, Nitailova, Karlovka. This is the first supply road that Ukrainians use. The second one goes from Umanska to Novosilovka, Persha, and then to Ocheretina and Pokrovsk, somewhere in this direction, let's say, Zhelanna. And the third supply road goes from Orlovka as well, Semyonovka, Berdychi, and then to Ocheretina. At least by the 18th of December, according to information we have, the Russians have already established partial fire control over the road from Berdychi to Ocheretina. This territory is under fire control. I'm not saying about like 100%, but the Ukrainians have losses higher than usual when using this supply road. And now the Russians are getting closer to the second supply road, and if they can get these water barriers and to establish control of Pervomaiske, they will increase the level of losses of the Ukrainian forces using this road as well. And the Ukrainians will have just one road left from Avdiivka, Orlyanka, Umanskaya, Novosilovka, Persha, and Pokrovsk. So this is going to be the only road, safe road, that Ukrainians could use for supporting their forces in this area. So the battle for Pervomaiske is very important, because not just like supply road depends on the results of this battle. Also, another important checkpoint that can collapse automatically if the Russians continue advancing is Nivolsk. And if the Russians take Nivolsk, obviously Krasnogorovka also will have a lot of problems, and the Ukrainians will be able to refactor and rebuild their defense belt in this village as well. So by taking Pervomaiske, a lot of cities and villages that depends on this defense belt can collapse, or at least the Ukrainians will be forced to reconfigure their situation and their positions. Now we are moving to the north in direction to Stepova and Novokalinova area. We haven't received a lot lots of updates, just the videos from the Ukrainian side, more updates, more details of another more attacks from the Russian side, which were repelled by the Ukrainians with the losses from the Russian side. Once again, I repeat my idea that we have already discussed yesterday, that the Russians do have problems on the northern direction, and they still haven't managed to find a solution how to penetrate the Ukrainian defense belt and how to bypass the Ukrainians in Stepovo, Berdychi, and Novokalinovo. The Ukrainian sources published satellite images from these two areas. For example, on this photo, we can see, if you haven't recognized this territory, this is Stepovo. As you can see, there is no even a single place where we can't find the another artillery, sign of artillery explosions. Significant number of artillery rounds were sent by both sides, either the Russians and the Ukrainians, and this picture explains us why it's so difficult for the Russians to continue attacking in this direction. The same picture we can find between Novokalinovo and Krasnogorovka. The same story, the south and the bottom picture show us the results of artillery fire of both sides, from the Russian and the Ukrainian side. And as you can see, according to this picture, the main concentration of artillery fire takes place in this area. So the Russians try to concentrate and collect some critical mass in this direction using Krasnogorovka, these supply roads and these redeployment roads, but for now we see that the Russians still haven't managed to concentrate critical mass, so we'll see what is going to be next. Obviously today and the next few days I expect some interesting updates from the Russian side regarding Pervomaiske and their further progress to the west. Now we're moving to Bakhmut, Artemov's direction. We also got a lot of very interesting details from this territory. Today the Russian sources published the video of Russian offensive operation in direction of Chernobylets Dachi, which confirms that this village is still under Ukraine control, or at least in the gray zone. On these scenes we can see Special Unit Akhmat, its Chechensky forces, and battalion or forces of Kamerton. Kamerton is ex-Wagner forces. Some Wagner forces created a separate organization, Kamerton, which consists of just veterans of Wagner. And these two brigades, these two forces, were storming Chernobyl's residential area, and as a result of that attack, they managed to capture a few strongholds and a few fortifications of the Ukrainian forces. So they haven't, according to that video, the Russians haven't established control over the entire territory, but before the next video, according to that geolocated information, we can update the map like this one. Furthermore, we got some updates from the Khromovo-Bogdanovka area. The Ukrainian sources published the video of another FPV drone strike against the Russian soldiers, which confirms the Russian progress in this territory. So other mappers are showing about some significant result of Russian attack, and according to Syriac, for example, the Russians managed to establish control over this territory on the north, not north, but on the northwest of Khromovo. So this is the Russian progress according to, let's say, Syriac and Deep State map. So this is a very nice result, but yet the Russians haven't managed to enter the hills, and the Russians currently are capturing and taking the control just the lowlands. To capture the hills, the first hills on this direction, the Russians need to establish control over this territory. So this is the first, let's say, entering hill on Chasov Yar foothold. If they can take this under control, then the situation is going to start developing much easier for the Russians. Also, Ukrainian sources reported that the Russians managed to concentrate up to 80,000 soldiers, military personnel in the Bakhmut direction. So it's a significant number of forces. Obviously, this is another army that will allow the Russians not just return control and establish control over every single Ukrainian foothold on the Russian bank of, let's say, canal that split Chasov Yar and Bakhmut, but obviously these 80,000 soldiers is enough to advance further in direction of Chasov Yar, Konstantinovka, Slaviansk, and Kramatorsk. And obviously the Russians are not going to stop themselves just on the canal. And I'll remind you that this is the canal line. This is it. Obviously the Russians have enough of forces to continue advancing further, either to the north and further to the west in direction of Konstantinovka, Alexeyevka, Drushkovka, and many other different cities and villages on this direction. We got very interesting update from Kurdyumovka, the Ukrainians published the video how they were attacking the Russian forces using FPV drones, small construction, and Ukrainians were attacking this territory, which confirms that as a result of some counter-offensive operations, the Russians managed to restore control at least over this territory. So we will update the map before the next video. Now we are moving to the north. We got few updates from Sinkyvka area. Very fierce clashes continues on this territory. The Ukrainians published a series of videos of FPV drone strikes and bombardments of the Russian forces, not just in forest but in the stronghold on the north of Sinkyvka, which we can use as another evidence of Russian control over this territory. Anyway, the situation is very difficult. The Russians control too small foothold, too small area for, let's say, safe, to be on the safe side. They need more. They need to capture a few more streets, not even like buildings, to feel safe themselves and to start developing further offensive operation deep inside of Sinkyvka. This is exactly what the Russians are doing right now. According to some sources like Deep State and Syriac also have updated their maps showing the northern part of Sinkyvka until this line under complete Russian control. Also, we got another video from Udai, the 32nd day, which started with the losses from the Ukrainian side on the level of 209 soldiers, and by the end of the day, by the end of 32nd day, the Ukrainians lost as a result of attacks and strikes of one FPV drone operator Udai 214 soldiers, additional 5 soldiers. So we have bypassed half a battalion a few days ago, and now we are getting to the 1 battalion per 1 FPV drone operator. And that's it for the short video. Military Summary channel reminds we condemn any violence in the world. Thank you for watching. Subscribe to my channel, put your likes, join my Patreon, and have a good day. Bye bye.